So, ich bin jetzt hier bei der Firma Rossum Electro-Music und hier gibt es einen ganz coolen Morphing Filter und wir werden jetzt mal nachfragen auf Englisch, was es denn damit auf sich hat. Bitte schön.
So Morpheus is based on the EMU module of the same name that was designed by me back in the early 1990s. This filter has been updated and redesigned for Eurorack. The idea of the morphing filter, it's a digital filter and it's a very complex filter. It can have up to 7 resonances and 7 notches in its frequency response. If you tried to program such a filter with the traditional control voltage approach of a CV for each frequency and a CV for each resonance or notch gain, it would take 28 CVs, and that's pretty silly. So the idea behind Morpheus is, as you can see on the screen here, we use what we call a cube model. And the cube has 3 dimensions. We have 3 control voltages coming into Morpheus. Let me pull up one of the filters here. I'm going to, there we go. Pull up what we call a cube flanger. And now we see the Morpheus displays its frequency response down here, and we can begin to see, as we turn the control, a series of peaks and notches. And those are being controlled by these parameters here. The way you can think of it is that in each corner of the cube, for example, you see the little fly speck over here in this corner of the cube, we have a frequency response that has 6 notches in it at 2 different frequencies. If I turn the transform control to go in 1 dimension along the edge of the cube, those notches have gone from spaced in 3 groups into 3 equally spaced groups. If I turn the morph control over here, we go from a bunch of notches to just a resonant peak and a single notch. So what Morpheus does is it moves in a perceptually smooth space. The frequencies are changing in octaves and semitones, the resonance are changing in decibels the way our ears hear, from one different frequency response to another among 8 frequency responses in the cube. When you do that, you can get a wide variety of different types of responses. For example, I can simulate a typical synthesizer filter. Here I have a high Q 4-pole low pass, and in this case the frequency response does more or less what we expect. It just changes the response there. And in this case the transform dimension just changes the resonance over there. Those are primarily what you do. So in this case the morph control is more like just a different version of the frequency control. But suppose you wanted a completely different type of filter. For example, you wanted a vocal filter. Here we have one that is more like the formats that your voice creates. And here we can see the frequency is controlling that very lowest resonance more than anything else. The morph control is the second resonance, and then the transform control, depending on where we are, has a different overall effect. Here it's affecting the low pass over here. What all of this does is allows you, by the designer who designed the vowel space cube, to control this so these really sound like the characteristics of vowels to him. So it's no longer thinking of frequency and Q, it's more thinking about just what sound am I looking for. There's 288 different cubes in the Morpheus, from ones that are designed to equalize particular sampled sounds, like a Rhodes piano here for that one. Here's one that sounds like a Moog vocoder as we sweep it around. The sky's the limit there. The one last really interesting feature in Morpheus is if I choose a sound, this one's an example where I've got a .4 over here. If you can look carefully on the screen, you'll see that the transform dimension now has instead a D, because the .4 means that the sound designer only wanted to use 4 corners of the cube. So the transform dimension wouldn't do anything. So instead we've made it so it's voltage controlled distortion. You can see the VU meter going sort of nuts there, as I suddenly get enough sound in the sound that it grabbed hold of a peak, and it gives you a sort of guitar feedback-like distortion sound. It's very useful, and it's nice to be able to voltage control it. Very similar in the sound to the original EMU Morpheus.
Do you have a price, and is it recommend to have the power supply as well?
So the price on Morpheus in US it's $499. I understand it typically sells for a little bit over 500 euros here in Europe. And the power requirements, it just requires plus and minus 12. I think it's about 120 milliamps on the plus 12 and about 40 on the negative 12. So medium power module. It's pretty easily powered, but you do not need a 5-volt supply for it.
Okay. Thank you very much for the interview.
You're very welcome. Thank you.